Klaus Mikaelson is not a villain, and is not a hero either. Here's what happens when a traumatized child is given godlike power and told to survive forever. Most people think Klaus is evil because he's cool, controlling, and violent. But that's not the misunderstanding. The misunderstanding is that people judge Klaus like he's a normal man, when nothing about his existence is human. Klaus was cursed before he ever felt safe, abandoned before he ever learned trust, and then made the most powerful being in the world, strong enough that no one could ever check him, correct him, or stop him. So power didn't corrupt Klaus. Power froze him. Because when control is the only thing that never leaves you, you start believing that love should be controlled too. And when people fail to meet impossible standards, it doesn't feel like disappointment. It feels like abandonment. This video isn't about excusing Klaus Mikaelson. It's about understanding why he was never built for redemption, and why that makes him one of the most misunderstood characters in television history. To understand Klaus Mikaelson, you have to understand this first. Klaus was afraid long before he was dangerous, before the legends, before the violence, before anyone whispered his name in fear. Klaus was a child raised in an environment where love was conditional and safety didn't exist. Mikael wasn't a father in the traditional sense. He ruled through intimidation, punishment, and humiliation. Strength was the only currency that mattered, and Klaus, smaller and different, was constantly reminded that he didn't measure up. This wasn't discipline. This was domination. And when a child grows up learning that affection can be withdrawn at any moment, they don't learn trust, they learn vigilance. Klaus learned early that love could turn into violence without warning. But the abuse wasn't the deepest wound. The deepest wound came later, when Klaus discovered the truth about who he really was. That Mikael wasn't his biological father. That the man who hated him wasn't even truly his. And that his mother, Esther, knew this and hid it. In that moment, Klaus' fear wasn't just confirmed, it was validated. The feeling he'd always carried, that he didn't belong, was no longer paranoia. It was reality. Klaus wasn't just unloved. He was misplaced. And this is where most people misunderstand him. For a human being, abandonment is a trauma you eventually grow around. Time dulls it. New experiences reshape it. Klaus doesn't get time. Immortality doesn't allow wounds to scar over. It traps them in a permanent present. Every rejection feels as sharp as the first one. Every betrayal feels final. And then comes a turning point. Klaus unlocks his true nature. He becomes a first hybrid, stronger than vampires, stronger than werewolves, stronger than anyone around him. For the first time in his existence, Klaus isn't powerless. And that power doesn't corrupt him. It stabilizes him. Because power gives Klaus something he's never had before. Certainty. Certainty that he can't be hurt the way he was as a child. Certainty that no one can dominate him the way Mikael did. Certainty that abandonment can be punished before it happens. But here's the tragedy. Klaus learned control before he ever learned safety. He learns dominance before he learns intimacy. He learns fear management before he learns love. So control becomes his language. When Klaus controls people, he isn't trying to be cruel. He's trying to make the world predictable, because predictability means safety. And this is why Klaus' standards are impossible. He expects absolute loyalty, total devotion, no hesitation, no independence, not because he's arrogant, but because anything less feels like abandonment all over again. When Elijah questions him, Klaus doesn't hear disagreement. He hears rejection. When Rebecca chooses someone else, Klaus doesn't feel jealousy. He feels replaced. And when those feelings surface, Klaus doesn't respond with sadness. He responds with rage. Because rage is active. Rage is powerful. Rage prevents him from ever feeling small again. Klaus isn't lashing out because he enjoys violence. He's lashing out because violence is the only emotional language that's ever kept him safe. And once you understand that, once you see Klaus not as a monster, but as a child whose fear outlived his childhood, his behavior stops being shocking and starts being inevitable. Klaus Mikaelson doesn't just lash out at the world. He lashes out at the people he loves the most. His family, his siblings. And on the surface, it seems cruel, unforgiving, impossible. But the truth is, the very same fear that shaped him as a child, the fear of abandonment, is what drives the standards for everyone around him. Klaus grew up knowing that those he should be able to trust the most could and would leave him. Mikael was gone before he could be a real father. Esther hid the truth about his nature. Betrayal, disappointment, and rejection weren't lessons to be learned. They were survival threats. So when Klaus looks at Elijah, Rebecca, or any member of his family, he doesn't just see what they are. He sees a potential to hurt him, the potential to leave, the potential to prove that he was right all along, that loyalty is fragile and love is temporary. That's why his standards are impossible. Absolute loyalty, total understanding, no hesitation, no independence. Every expectation isn't a demand for perfection. It's a test against abandonment. Because if they fail him, it confirms his worst fear. He is alone. Again. And this is where the cycle begins. His siblings inevitably make mistakes. They defy him. They prioritize their own lives. And every time, Klaus reacts not just with anger, but with a kind of preemptive defense, a show of power meant to remind everyone who is in control. But underneath the rage is pain, hurt, the constant fear that those closest to him will leave him, as they always have in his mind. Take Elijah. Klaus expects unwavering loyalty from him, and when Elijah hesitates, it isn't just betrayal he sees. It's proof that attachment is dangerous, that love can be withdrawn at any moment, that the one person he trusted is not enough to protect him from feeling powerless again. Take Rebecca. She chooses her independence, her own happiness, her own life. Klaus doesn't understand it, because in his experience, love is conditional. To survive, he believes, he must control it, every word, every action, every allegiance. And yet, paradoxically, he continues to love them, fiercely, intensely, completely. But his love is inseparable from his fear. Every demonstration of affection is tempered by the constant threat that it could be withdrawn. Every act of care is shadowed by the anticipation of betrayal. In short, Klaus treats his family the way he was taught the world treats children, with fear, with control, and with impossible standards. Only this time, it's not to break them, it's to protect himself from being broken again. And that is the cruel genius of Klaus Mikaelson. He punishes the ones he loves not because he wants to hurt them, but because he cannot allow the past to repeat itself. His rage is a shield, his perfectionism is armor, and his impossible standards are the only way he knows to survive a world where everyone he loves is always one step away from leaving. Klaus Mikaelson's relationships aren't simple. Even among vampires, he struggles to find someone who can stand beside him without either breaking under his control or leaving. And that's why Stefan Salvatore matters. Stefan is one of the few people Klaus doesn't see purely as subordinate or threat. He doesn't try to dominate Stefan the way he does with almost everyone else. Instead, Klaus respects him, quietly, carefully, almost reluctantly. But here's the twist. Respect does not equal equality. Klaus still looks down on Stefan, still judges him, still sees the flaws that most would excuse in a friend. Why? Because Klaus has built his standards around survival. And Stefan, like Klaus, is a creature of morality, of restraint. That restraint is admirable, but also frustrating. Klaus respects the discipline Stefan has over himself, his control of his impulses, his refusal to become consumed by power. And yet he cannot fully respect the weakness he perceives, the moment Stefan hesitates, compromises, or refuses to act. That tension is a heartbeat of their friendship. Stefan is not just a friend. Stefan is a no-blood brother. Let me explain. A no-blood brother is someone who shares loyalty, trust, and understanding. Someone who chooses allegiance without being bound by family or magic. Someone who proves himself to Klaus on merit rather than fear or obligation. Stefan earns that loyalty every time he stands by Klaus despite the chaos. Every time he acts with integrity, even when Klaus would have crushed him for a minor failure. Every time he defies, yet respects the power dynamic between them. And that makes Stefan special. One of the few people Klaus never fully expects to abandon him. One of the few whose presence reminds Klaus that not everyone will fail him. But even this relationship is complicated. Klaus can't help himself. He still judges Stefan, still measures him against impossible standards, still tests him. And when Stefan falters, even in the smallest way, Klaus' disappointment is immediate, sharp, and raw. And yet, he never lets Stefan go. never pushes him away completely. Because for Klaus, Stefan represents something he rarely allows himself to believe in: loyalty without betrayal. In a world where everyone else is either a family member who will disappoint him, a subordinate who will fail him, or a rival who will challenge him, Stefan is a rare exception. Their relationship isn't perfect. It isn't simple, but it's real. And for Klaus, real is everything. Respect, judgment, loyalty, frustration, admiration, and trust, all tangled together in a friendship that is complicated as he is. Stefan shows us that Klaus isn't incapable of connection. He just builds connections like he builds power, carefully, strategically, and with a constant fear that they might crumble. And that is what makes Stefan one of Klaus Mikaelson's best relationships. Not because Stefan is flawless, not because Klaus is suddenly good, but because they are honest mirrors of one another in a world that rarely allows honesty at all. Klaus Mikaelson becomes a father, and for the first time, someone enters his life who cannot fail him in the usual ways. A daughter is not a sibling. She is not a rival. She cannot be disloyal by choice. And yet, the arrival of his child doesn't erase the man Klaus is. He is still shaped by abandonment. He is still shaped by fear. He is still shaped by centuries of being the first, the strongest, the uncheckable. What changes? The target of his intensity. Instead of directing his impossible standards toward siblings or rivals, he now channels them toward the one person he can protect completely, the one person whose vulnerability he can control. But make no mistake, control does not mean softness. Klaus does not suddenly become gentle. He does not suddenly trust easily. His love does not negate the rage, the perfectionism, or the fear. In fact, fatherhood amplifies his vigilance. Every threat to her safety is a threat to the world he has built. Every perceived slight against her becomes a personal betrayal. And yet, unlike with siblings or allies, he cannot punish her for failing him. She is innocent. This forces Klaus to learn, in small increments, the difference between disappointment and danger. And here is the paradox. He cannot control the world around her, but he can control how fiercely he protects her. His rage, which once targeted siblings, friends, and rivals, now becomes a shield. A violent, unrelenting shield that says, "No one will hurt what I love." But love alone does not remake a man. Klaus' love for his daughter is intense, obsessive, protective, but it does not undo the core patterns of his life. He still fears abandonment. He still expects betrayal. He still struggles with anger when the people he loves falter or challenge him. And yet, through this, we see something new. Fatherhood introduces vulnerability that is not tied to fear of betrayal. It is a vulnerability that exists because he chooses to love. For once, his emotional investment is voluntary. It is not a test, not a manipulation, not a measure of loyalty. Consider his interactions with those closest to him. With his daughter, he shows patience he rarely gives anyone else. He plans for her future, makes sacrifices, and sometimes even tempers his rage. Not because he has suddenly become gentle, but because he recognizes that her world must be allowed to exist without constant fear. Yet, the lessons of centuries cannot be erased. Klaus remains the same man, high standards, vigilant, sometimes unforgiving. Fatherhood does not make him soft. It makes him deliberate. It forces him to apply the same intensity he has always carried in a new way, as a protector rather than a punisher. And this is the most compelling part of Klaus Mikaelson as a father. He demonstrates that love and fear are not opposites. They are intertwined. Every act of care carries the weight of centuries of distrust. Every moment of affection is sharpened by the knowledge of what losing it would feel like. His daughter cannot fail him, and yet he cannot stop measuring the world through the lens of his old traumas. Every threat she faces triggers the echoes of every betrayal he has ever endured. Every smile she gives him is a reminder of what is worth fighting for. Klaus Mikaelson is not a man changed by fatherhood. He is a man expanded. The love he feels does not override his rage, his fear, or his high standards. It channels them, shapes them, focuses them. And that is why fatherhood does not redeem him. It does not make him good. It does not erase centuries of abandonment, control, or rage. But it does show us the layers of the man we often misunderstand. That even a monster, a man defined by fear, power, and rage, can love with a depth that defies comprehension. That even Klaus Mikaelson, the most feared and misunderstood character in television, can be fiercely, unforgettably human. Fatherhood does not change Klaus Mikaelson. It merely reminds us that even someone shaped by trauma, control, and centuries of unrelenting power is capable of love. Love that is just as intense, just as consuming, and just as complex as everything else he has ever known. Klaus Mikaelson is not a villain. He is not a hero. He is a man shaped by fear, power, abandonment, and love all at once. From the moment he was born, Klaus was thrust into a world that demanded perfection and punished vulnerability. His childhood taught him that love is conditional, trust is fragile, and safety is fleeting. And when he gained power, immortality, hybrid strength, and uncheckable control, he did not become corrupted. He became unchallengeable. That is the key to understanding him. Every relationship, every rage, every impossibly high standard flows from the same source. A man who has been abandoned, underestimated, and forced to survive at all costs. His family, his siblings, and even his closest friends are not merely targets of control. They are mirrors, tests of loyalty, trust, and love. Stefan is one of the rare exceptions, a nobler brother who earns respect and challenges him, yet remains steadfast. His daughter is another, someone whose presence demands love without fear, yet cannot erase the core of who he is. Klaus Mikaelson is a study in contrasts, cruelty and care, rage and protection, power and vulnerability. And that is why he is so often misunderstood. People judge him by the standards of ordinary humans, expecting him to behave like a man who has known safety, consistency, and love from birth. But Klaus Mikaelson was never given those things. He was given immortality, power, and abandonment, and he responded in the only way he could, with control, intensity, and fiercely measured love. To call him a villain is to ignore the child who never felt safe. To call him a hero is to ignore the centuries of rage and impossible standards that define him. Klaus Mikaelson is not meant to be understood easily. He is meant to challenge us, to make us question how trauma, power, and love can exist together. And when you finally see him for what he is, not evil, not redeemed, not perfect, you see the most misunderstood character in television. A man shaped by his past, bound by his nature, yet capable of love in a way few others ever will. Klaus Mikaelson is a monster to some, but a mirror to all of us, showing what happens when fear, love, and power collide.